What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Who Wants to Brawl YouTube channel. That is not a question, that is a statement. My name is Who, and I'm letting you know I want to brawl. Here, we're all about the Magic format brawl, specifically in regards to Magic Arena, so we don't have to worry about budget, we only have to worry about wildcards.
This episode is a new deck tech. On these episodes, I go over a new Brawl commander and walk you through my ideas and strategies of how best to build this commander. Today we have something a little bit different, and we're going to do a Historic Brawl deck. Magic Arena is having a Historic Brawl festival the week of this video, so I figured I'd give something new a shot, and here we have Orvar the All-Form. It is a 4-mana 3/3 Changeling that whenever we cast an instant sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents we control, we create a token copy of that permanent. It also has a second ability that when you discard it, you create a token that's a copy of a permanent, but since it's our commander, we're pretty much never going to discard it, so we can pretty much ignore that. So with this commander, we're going to want to use instants and sorceries that target our stuff by protecting it or creating a token that's a copy. Historic Brawl is pretty much limited to one night from an FNM at home event, so I don't fully know that, so I'm going to use kind of cold, but hopefully this deck turns out just as fun as I hope it will. Our first strategy is going to be creatures to target. These are going to be the creatures that we want to have more of, and each add value in their own way, whether it's through win conditions like attacking, or card draw, or just value in some other way. Ascendant Spirit and Pteramander are great 1-drops that are great mana sinks throughout the game. They also usually act as diversions in this deck. Our opponent usually uses their removal on these, so we avoid our opponent having their removal for the bigger creatures we're going to drop later in the game. And then Ghostly Pilferer will draw us a card anytime our opponent casts a commander, or anytime an opponent casts something from exile or graveyard, which happens a decent amount of the time, so this is just a great value engine. And then Tempest Gin is just a generically good card to have in a mono blue deck. Glasspool Mimic can copy any creature we have, but in this deck we also usually use it more as a land than anything. It's great to have that flexibility though. Murmuring Mystic is a great value engine that whenever we cast a spell, it gives us a 1/1 bird creature token. And we can get back our spells with Shipwreck Dowser. This is especially potent because we can use those spells we get back to cast Shipwreck Dowser and get even more spells back. And then Solemn Simulacrum, in all honesty, is a better 4-drop than Orvar because it allows us to ramp, and then next turn when we cast Orvar, we'll have mana available to cast one of our spells that targets our creatures. And then Wavebreak Hippocamp is a perfect card to have in this deck. Most of the time we're going to be using our spells as our opponents target them to save them, so we can do that with the Wavebreak Hippocamp and get even more Wavebreak Hippocamps, drawing us even more cards. Torrential Gearhulk can get absolutely silly in this deck because when it enters the battlefield, we can cast something in our graveyard that targets it, and with Orvar on the battlefield, we get a copy of the Gearhulk, which we can then use to use a different spell in our graveyard to target another Gearhulk and just run an absolute chain on our opponents. Most of the time, they concede when we have about 2 Gearhulks on the battlefield. And then Agent of Treachery will just take our opponent's best card, and then we can target the Agent of Treachery to do it again. Once you get 2 or 3, it becomes nearly impossible to deal with. And then Cavalier of Gales brainstorms every time it enters the battlefield, which is perfect in this deck. It gives us that card selection and that card draw that it absolutely needs. Our next strategy is going to be hitting our opponents with some tempo. Blue doesn't have a lot of straight up removal, so we have to slow our opponents down by countering spells or bouncing permanents in order to get ahead of our opponents. We also have a few counter spells in our deck to slow our opponents down. Tails In counters a legendary spell, which comes up a lot in Brawl, as you might imagine. We have Essence Scatter to deal with creatures. Wizard's Retort is great in this deck. It's usually 2 mana because Orvar counts as a wizard. Mystical Dispute is great when countering our opponent's counterspell because it only costs 1 mana to target a blue spell. Solid Coming is great because we can foretell it a turn before we actually need it, reducing its mana cost. And then Rewind is especially great in this deck because we can counter a spell and then still have enough mana up to target one of our creatures with one of our other spells. particularly a spell that gives our creature hexproof or something along those lines. Baron and Exclusion Mage each bounce a creature when they enter the battlefield. Brazen Borrower has an adventure that bounces a spell, and then we can cast it for 3 mana as a 3/1 flyer with flash. And then Dungeon Geists taps down a creature until it leaves the battlefield, and then with Orvar on the battlefield, we can target this, getting another creature, and essentially locking the board down. Our next strategy is going to be targeting spells. These are spells that target our creatures and give us value in other ways than just targeting them, such as giving them hexproof when they go to be removed, or blinking them so we get extra enter the battlefield triggers. Dive Down and Glint each give a creature +0/+3 in hexproof, while Spell Shield gives a creature +0/+3 by itself, but we can kick it to give that creature hexproof as well. Essence Flux and Teferi Time Twist each exile a creature we control and then return it to the battlefield. This allows us to create a token that has an enter the battlefield trigger and re-trigger that enters the battlefield when it exiles and comes back. These cards are great in our deck. And then in a pinch, if our opponent is targeting one of our creatures, we can rescue it, pun intended, by using rescue to return it to our hand. Our next strategy is going to be utility pieces. These are pieces that don't necessarily fit into any category, but help smooth out our deck nonetheless. Jwari Disruption can be a counterspell or a land, depending on when we need it and when we draw it. Ravenform is an absolutely essential way to deal with creatures, especially big creatures, and especially once they're already on the battlefield. Blue has a hard time dealing with it other than bouncing it and then countering it, but we don't really want to do that because that requires 2 cards to do that. So Ravenform gets rid of that by only using 1 card to get rid of a creature on the battlefield. And then Runaway Together is great in this deck because it targets one of our creatures and still bounces one of our opponents, meaning we get a copy of the creature and get the creature back in our hand. Search for Azcanta is just a useful card. Search for Azcanta is just a useful card. It helps smooth out our draws, and then later in the game does ramp us and acts as a card draw spell, which is just enough for it to be included in this deck. And then Sublime Epiphany is just great all on its own, being able to counter a spell, a triggered or activated ability, bounce a permanent, create a token that's a copy of one of our creatures, and then draw us a card. We also get extra use out of that copy of one of our creatures because it targets one of our creatures, so we'll essentially get 2 copies of it. And then for ramp, we have Mind Stone, which taps for a colorless, and then 1 mana tapping it and sacking it, we can draw a card. Arcane Signet just taps to add blue mana in this deck. And then Midnight Clock taps to add blue, but for 3 mana we can put an hour counter on it. And then when the 12th hour counter is put on it, we shuffle our graveyard and hand into our library and then draw 7 cards. And then finally, we're going to round our deck out with some land, which we only have 3 different types of land in our deck. We have Fabled Passage, which fetches for a basic land, and then if we have 4 or more lands, we untap that land. Faceless Haven is a snow land that happens to be a man land as well. And then we have 21 snow-covered islands. So now we're going to talk about some upgrades for the deck. Having played it a little bit, I thought of some better things that we can improve upon, and here's where we're going to talk about those things. To improve the card draw on the deck, we're going to put in Cloudkin Seer and Augur of Bolas. Both of these will allow us to draw some more cards. And in their places, we're going to take out Baron and Shipwreck Douser. Baron underperformed in this deck, seeing that when we copy it, we don't get to keep the token because the token goes away because of the legend rule. It's not really worth it. I'd rather have the card draw. And Shipwreck Douser was just too big and didn't have enough of an upside in the deck. So drawing the cards is better than getting the card back. We're also going to take out Rescue and put in Absorb Identity. Being able to bounce one of our opponent's creatures is better than just being able to bounce one of ours, even for the 1 extra mana. The possible tempo hit will be worth it. We're going to want to take out Midnight Clock and put in Cold Steel Heart. In this deck, having that earlier ramp is more important than having that late game upside with Midnight Clock, so this is a fairly easy decision. So that does it for Orvar, the All Form. What did you think of this video? Would you have put in cards that I didn't think of? There's probably going to be a few, considering this is Historic Brawl. What changes would you make? Let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And that does it for this video. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Share with a friend to help the channel grow. Hit that bell icon to make sure you get notifications about new videos to make sure you don't miss anything. I also want to give a shout out to my buddy Rob Slota for making the Who Wants to Brawl logo. He's a tattoo artist, and you can check out his Instagram by following the link in the show notes below. You can email me at whowantstobrawl@gmail.com. My Twitter is @brawlwho. I also stream on Magic Arena at twitch.tv/whowantstobrawl. Check me out on Sundays at 11 in the morning, where I stream last week or next week's deck tech. On Mondays, I stream random decks. Sometimes I do Brawl, sometimes I'll even throw in a draft. I also stream a random day of the week, or at least I try to. This is Random Games. Follow me on Twitter, and I'll let you know when I'm going to play ahead of time and what I'm going to play ahead of time. But for now, this is Who letting you know I no longer want to brawl. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.